The faint scent of old wood and candle wax lingered in the small room behind the village church, where Emma stood silently before a foggy mirror. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the white cotton wedding dress, each stitch lovingly sewn by her mother, who had made it with all her heart before passing away. The dress was simple, with no jewels or lace, but to Emma it was a treasure, the last warmth of happier days. Through a narrow window the morning sun filtered in, casting light across the golden rice fields beyond. Sparrows chirped softly, as if to comfort her, as if to say that everything would be all right, even though she knew a storm of judgment waited outside. Today, Emma would marry Lucas, the young billionaire, once hailed as a symbol of brilliance and compassion, now bound to a wheelchair and the ridicule of the world. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions rising in her chest. In her heart, this marriage wasn't just a cold contract, it was a silent promise, a secret she had never shared with anyone, not even herself. Lucas sat in a finely crafted wheelchair, his black suit fitted perfectly, unable to conceal his motionless legs. His face was sharp, his deep blue eyes like the ocean vast but empty, as if every emotion had been drained from him the day tragedy struck 2 years ago, the day he lost his beloved older brother and the ability to walk. But behind that icy exterior was a carefully calculated plan. According to his father's will, Lucas had to marry before his 30th birthday in order to retain his inheritance and position as CEO of the family conglomerate. Otherwise, everything would fall into the hands of Marcus's cousin with a fake smile and a burning ambition. Lucas no longer wanted love. He didn't want to trust anyone again. But he needed a wife, someone who wouldn't threaten the isolated world he had built. Emma was the perfect choice. A poor girl from the countryside with no complicated ties, no ambition, and most importantly, she had agreed to the marriage contract. 3 years as a wife in name only, no interference in each other's lives, and a large sum of money once it ended. Lucas had only met her once before the wedding, in a lawyer's office, where she signed the contract with trembling hands but steady eyes. He didn't understand why she agreed, and he didn't care. To Lucas, this was nothing more than a transaction. But when Emma walked down the aisle, her worn canvas shoes brushing softly against the flower-strewn path, Lucas felt a flicker of confusion. She was nothing like the women he'd known, no arrogance, no display. Her head held high, her brown hair tied simply, and her eyes, they held no greed, no calculation. She looked at him and only him as if the entire world had vanished. The chapel was packed, but the air felt heavy with curious stares and cruel whispers. "She's marrying him for the money, obviously," a woman in a pearl necklace sneered. "The crippled billionaire and the gold digger, what a joke," another man snorted. "She'll run the moment she gets the chance. Mark my words." Outside, reporters jostled for space, camera flashes erupting, ready to turn this wedding into a tabloid spectacle. Wedding or greed-driven farce? Emma walked slowly but with steady steps. She could feel the invisible daggers of judgment in every glance, but she didn't falter. An old memory came flooding back the first time she'd read about Lucas, the young man who had built dozens of homes for orphans, who had turned down fame to do quiet but meaningful work. She had admired him from afar, following his journey through headlines. When news of his accident broke, her heart shattered. She had cried alone in her tiny rented room, not out of pity, but mourning for a brilliant soul swallowed by darkness. Now standing before him, she knew she hadn't just signed a contract. She had signed a vow to stay by his side, even if the world turned against them. That secret love she kept hidden in her chest, too afraid to show it, fearing that one day it would be the very thing that hurt her most. The elderly priest, his voice warm and steady, began, "Emma, do you take this man to be your husband, in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty?" Emma looked at Lucas, her eyes soft but unwavering. "I do," she said, her voice clear and resolute, echoing through the hushed chapel. Only she knew that her answer was more than a formality. It was her heart whispering, a wish to stand beside the man she had quietly loved for so long, even if he never knew. Laughter erupted from the back pews, cruel and mocking, like needles pricking her pride. A photographer snapped a shot, the flash blinding for a moment. Emma blinked, then gently reached out, taking Lucas's hand and giving it a light squeeze. His hand was ice cold, unmoving on his lap, offering nothing in return. But she didn't let go. She wanted him to feel that, no matter how far he pushed her away, she would stay. After the ceremony, when the guests had left, Emma stood alone by the window, gazing at the rice fields glowing in the sunset. The smell of dry grass and countryside soil soothed her, but her heart remained heavy. She had never expected a wedding full of flowers and laughter, but Lucas's coldness made her feel lonelier than ever. She wondered if he would ever open up to her, or if she would always be just a cog in his grand plan. Lucas was still there, in the corner of the room, silently wheeling back and forth. He watched her from a distance, his gaze unreadable. Emma turned, offering a soft smile, trying to hide the ache inside. "Today is our wedding day, Lucas," she said gently. "Aren't you going to say anything to me?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes swept over her, then drifted to the fields beyond. "You don't have to try," he said, his voice low and cold. "This is just a transaction. You know that." And with that, he turned his chair and rolled out, the wheels creaking softly on the wooden floor. Emma stood still, her heart twisting in pain. His words were like knives. But as she looked out at the golden fields, her eyes hardened with quiet resolve. She would prove she hadn't married him for money or for a contract. She had married him because her heart had chosen him long ago, and she would spend the rest of her life making him believe it. The wedding was over, but Emma's journey had only just begun. Within her, a small flame still burned, faint but unwavering. She knew the road ahead would be harsh and unforgiving. But she was ready. For Lucas, for the love she kept hidden, and for herself. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Lucas's mansion perched precariously on a hillside, surrounded by ancient oak trees whose sprawling canopies cast shadows like sentinels guarding a forgotten kingdom. From the outside, it looked like a classical painting, weathered gray stone walls draped in moss, towering arched windows, and meticulously tended rose bushes blooming deep red. But inside, the air was cold as a tomb. The marble floors shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. $1,000,000 paintings lined the walls, and yet, the emptiness was stark. Emma sensed it from the moment she stepped into the house, as if joy had long been drained from its walls, leaving behind nothing but a hollow silence. Lucas treated her like a faint shadow, someone who existed solely to fulfill basic needs. "Bring me a glass of water," he said, his voice low and sharp, devoid of feeling. "Close the door," he ordered, eyes never leaving the book in his hand, even though she knew he wasn't really reading. To Lucas, Emma was nothing more than a line in a marriage contract, a cold arrangement that allowed him to keep his inheritance and his position as CEO. The terms were clear. She would receive a large sum after 3 years, as long as she played the role of the perfect wife, silent, obedient, and never stepping into his private world. He believed she was here for the money, and he had no intention of letting her breach the glass wall he had built around his heart. But Emma wasn't shaken by his cold words. Quietly, she cared for him, the same way she once tended the little flowers in her childhood garden, with patience, gentleness, and no expectation of return. Every morning she cleaned his vast room, arranging the books he liked even though he never touched them. She cooked simple meals, pumpkin soup, toasted bread, and placed them on the table with a wildflower from the garden, hoping a splash of color might ease his loneliness. At night she sat by his window and read aloud from old novels in a warm, calm voice, though he often cut her off with a curt, "That's enough. Go back to your room." Emma never complained. She understood that Lucas's coldness wasn't disdain for her, it was armor shielding old wounds. She saw it in the way his hands clenched when the past was mentioned, in the lost look in his eyes when he stared out the window. And she believed that somewhere deep inside him still lived the man she had once admired from afar, the man who donated millions to orphans, who smiled brightly in news photos she had carefully saved in an old notebook. One afternoon, as the soft golden sunlight filtered through the curtains, Emma finally did something she had long wanted to do. She knelt beside Lucas and gently placed her hands on his motionless legs, beginning to massage them with slow, careful movements. "What are you doing?" he snapped, his voice tense, hands gripping the armrest as he pushed her away forcefully. "Stop! I don't need that." Emma looked up at him, her eyes calm but resolute. "The doctor said this might help with your nerve sensitivity," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "Please, just let me try. Just once." Lucas stared at her, his gaze sharp as ice, as though trying to pierce through her, but he said nothing more. At last he turned his face away, allowing her to continue. Emma worked in silence, her hands moving gently as if trying to transfer a bit of warmth into his body. She didn't expect thanks, but when she stood up, she noticed his hands had relaxed. A small change, but enough to make her heart beat faster. That evening, sitting beside him, Emma began to share a story from her childhood. "When I was little, I used to run into the rice fields behind our house," she said, her voice like a breeze. "Whenever I felt sad, I'd sit there and stare at the sky, and it always made me feel like things would be okay. Do you have a place like that, Lucas? Somewhere that makes you feel safe?" Usually he wouldn't respond, or he'd scold her to stop talking so much. His eyes stayed fixed on the wall across the room, but Emma noticed his shoulders had slightly relaxed. She didn't press him. She just smiled and returned to reading. She knew that reaching him would take time, and she was willing to wait. One night, as a storm howled outside, thunder rattling the window frames, Emma jolted awake to a strange sound, a faint groan coming from Lucas's room. She threw on a robe and rushed through the dark hallway, her heart pounding. Pushing the door open, she saw Lucas lying in bed, his forehead drenched in sweat, his hands gripping the sheets. "James, don't go," he murmured in his sleep, his voice breaking in pain. "Don't leave me. Please." Emma stood frozen, her heart aching. James, Lucas's older brother, the one who had died in the accident that left Lucas paralyzed. She remembered reading about the crash, alone in her rented room, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't know Lucas then, but she cried for him, for the man who had once been a light in so many lives, now swallowed by darkness. And now, seeing him suffer in his sleep, that pain felt like her own. She sat beside his bed and gently wiped the sweat from his brow. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. She stayed there quietly until his groaning softened and the storm outside began to calm. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, she rose and left a small note on his pillow. Her handwriting was soft but sure. "If someone tries to make you fall, I'll be the one who helps you stand." The next morning, when Emma walked in with his breakfast tray, she saw Lucas holding the note, his eyes lingering on her words. He said nothing, but for the first time, he didn't push her away. "You don't have to do all this," he said, his voice low, no longer as cold. "The contract doesn't require you to care." Emma smiled gently as she set the tray down. "I'm not doing it because of the contract," she replied, her eyes glowing with quiet warmth. "I'm doing it because I want to." Lucas looked at her, his expression unreadable, as if trying to search for something in her words. He didn't respond. But as she walked away, she heard him exhale softly, a quiet sound, yet enough to tell her that the glass wall between them had begun to crack. Back in her room, Emma sat by the window, looking out at the oak-covered hill blanketed in morning mist. Inside her, a small flame continued to burn, faint but unyielding. She knew the road ahead would be long, that Lucas wouldn't open his heart easily, that the world would still mock her, but she wasn't afraid, because she believed that no matter how strong that glass wall was, she would find a way to reach his heart, not for money, not for the contract, but for the secret love she had carried in her heart for so long. Morning sunlight filtered through the slats of the wooden blinds in the mansion's library, casting warm streaks across towering bookshelves layered in the dust of time. Emma stood in the middle of the vast room, her fingers gliding over the spines of worn leather-bound books, but her mind wasn't on them. For several weeks now, a vague sense of unease had lingered in her, like a shadow, like something within this house, or within Lucas's past, was trying to stay hidden. She had started noticing the small things, the way the staff avoided eye contact, how conversations abruptly ended when she entered the room, and most of all, the presence of Marcus, Lucas's cousin, whose fake smile and razor-sharp gaze unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite explain. That day, while searching for a book on botany to help care for her flower garden, Emma accidentally discovered a hidden drawer in an antique wooden desk. Inside was an old medical file, the paper yellowed with age, bearing Lucas's name. Her heart pounded as she opened it, but curiosity quickly turned into suspicion. Several key pages, particularly those detailing Lucas's condition following the accident, had been torn out, leaving behind jagged, frayed edges. She skimmed through the remaining pages and found a mention of a sole witness, a mechanic named Daniel, who had inspected Lucas's car before the crash. But when she asked the butler, he responded curtly, "He moved overseas right after. No one knows where he went." Emma gripped the file tighter, her heart heavy. She didn't believe in coincidences. The accident had taken Lucas's brother and left him paralyzed, but why were critical details missing? And why did Marcus, with all his charm and impeccable manners, exude such a threatening presence? She returned the file to its hiding place and resolved to quietly investigate further, even if it meant unearthing secrets Lucas's family clearly didn't want her to find. Life in the mansion went on, but the air was growing more suffocating by the day. Lucas still kept his distance from Emma, but the iciness in his demeanor had softened somewhat. He no longer barked commands as sharply, and every now and then, she caught him watching her longer than usual as though trying to read her thoughts. Emma continued caring for him with quiet dedication, from massaging his unresponsive legs to reading aloud at night. She shared memories of her childhood dreams, of afternoons running barefoot through rice fields, hoping these stories might awaken a sliver of light within him. Lucas rarely responded, but he no longer cut her off like before. These were small signs, but enough to make her believe he was beginning to open up, however slightly. Everything changed, however, during a dinner party at the mansion, hosted to welcome a major corporate partner. Emma didn't want to attend. She knew she didn't belong in a world of glittering gowns and overpriced wine. But Lucas insisted. "You're my wife," he said, his voice low but emotionless. "They need to see that." Emma nodded, slipping into a simple blue dress, her brown hair pulled back neatly, and entered the ballroom with a heavy heart. The room shimmered with chandelier light, the soft strains of violin music echoing across polished marble. But tension thickened the air. Marcus stood among the guests, wineglass in hand, his false smile widening when he spotted Emma. Once the crowd had gathered, he raised his glass and projected his voice. "I'd like to propose a toast to Emma, the girl who turned a fairy tale into reality. A poor country wife and a crippled billionaire? What a perfect pair, wouldn't you say?" Laughter exploded across the room, sharp as shattering glass. A few guests tried to stifle it behind polite hands, but their eyes betrayed their scorn. Emma stood frozen, hands clutching the fabric of her dress, as if the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. She wasn't someone who broke easily, but those words and the silence that followed cut like blades into her pride. She looked toward Lucas, seated in his wheelchair at the far end of the room, silently praying he would say something, anything, to defend her. But he only lowered his head, eyes fixed on the floor, his hands gripping the armrest tightly, as if struggling to contain something. Emma smiled even though her heart bled. She wouldn't let them see her crumble. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, voice steady but edged with steel. "I'm proud to stand beside Lucas no matter what the world says." With that, she turned and left the ballroom before her tears could fall. That night, Emma hid away in the greenhouse behind the garden, the place where she tended her small flowers for comfort. Moonlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating dewdrops on delicate petals. She sat on a wooden bench, arms wrapped around herself, letting her tears roll silently down her cheeks. The next morning, as Emma was tending to her flower pots in the greenhouse, she heard the soft hum of electric wheels rolling along the gravel path. She looked up, startled to see Lucas maneuvering his wheelchair toward her on his own. The early sun fell across his face, highlighting its sharp lines. Though exhaustion clung to his expression, he stopped a few feet away, his gaze resting on her, not as cold as before. "Last night," he began, his voice low, slightly hesitant, "I didn't laugh. I don't think like they do." He paused as if searching for the right words. "But I saw... you stayed." Emma looked at him, her heart suddenly warm. She knelt down to meet his eye level, offering him a gentle smile. "I'll always stay, Lucas," she said, her eyes glowing with the affection she'd kept hidden. "No matter what they say, no matter what you think of me, I'm here." Lucas didn't respond right away. He looked at her, his gaze deep, as though trying to decipher if her words were true. At last he gave a small nod and turned his chair to leave. But as he exited the greenhouse, Emma noticed something. For the first time, he hadn't turned away from her in cold dismissal. Emma stood in the old garage of the mansion, where flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow on cars draped in tarps and dusted by time. The scent of motor oil and metal hung in the damp air, making her wrinkle her nose slightly, but her focus didn't waver. Ever since she had found the medical file with the missing pages in the library, suspicion about Lucas's accident had gnawed at her. Whenever she brought it up to members of the household, she was met with evasive glances and vague responses. "That's all in the past, Miss Emma," the butler had said, his voice trembling. "Please don't reopen Mr. Lucas's wounds." But Emma's intuition and instinct, sharpened by years of hardship in the countryside, told her something wasn't right. She had been paying close attention to Marcus, Lucas's cousin, the one who always smiled too perfectly, but whose eyes were as sharp as blades. The way he cut off conversations when the accident came up, the mysterious late-night phone calls, and his excessive involvement in Lucas's life all unsettled her. She remembered what the butler had said about Daniel, the only mechanic connected to the accident, who had supposedly moved overseas immediately afterward. That coincidence felt far too convenient. In a corner of the garage, Emma found an old wooden box, its carved design faded by time. Inside was a pile of scattered papers, receipts, invoices, and one particular repair slip that made her freeze. It was dated just one day before Lucas's accident, bearing Daniel's signature, along with a handwritten note: "Brake inspection per special request. Ensure no trace left." Attached was a small, roughly scribbled thank you note. "Thank you, Marcus. It's done." In the corner of the receipt, the pair was clearly listed. Paid by Mr. Harrington. Harrington, Marcus's last name. Emma's heart pounded. Why had Marcus paid for Lucas's car repairs? And why would Daniel note that the brake check was done to ensure no trace left? She gripped the paper tightly, anger and fear churning in her chest. She took photos of the documents and sent them to Mr. Henry, an independent lawyer she trusted. "Please find out if Daniel really moved overseas," she wrote, her fingers trembling, but her words firm, "and investigate what Marcus did to that car." She knew she was walking into something dangerous, but she couldn't stay silent, not to prove anything to Lucas, but because she believed he deserved the truth. The truth about what had taken James and his ability to walk. Back in the greenhouse, her sanctuary, Emma sat quietly, holding the folder of documents close. Her heart weighed heavy with conflict. She knew Lucas deeply trusted Marcus. They had grown up together, side by side. Telling Lucas about her suspicions could destroy that bond and the fragile trust she had only just begun to build with him. But to remain silent would be to betray her own faith in the truth. After hours of wrestling with herself, Emma made her decision. She would tell Lucas not to make him believe her, but to give him the chance to see the truth for himself. She carefully put the documents back in the box, brought the photos and the note, and took a deep breath before walking into Lucas's room. Lucas was sitting in the reading room, the golden light of sunset streaming through the tall windows, highlighting the sharp but weary lines of his face. A book lay open on the table in front of him, untouched. Emma entered, her hand tightly gripping the photo, her heart pounding, though her eyes remained steady. "Lucas," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I need to talk to you about the accident. I found something. I think it might be related to Marcus." Lucas's brow furrowed. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his gaze flashing with anger. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice ice cold. "You're making things up just to win me over. Marcus is family. You think I'd believe you, someone who's only here because of a contract over him?" His words cut like a blade, but Emma didn't back down. She placed the photo of the receipt and the note in front of him, her voice calm but firm. "This is the repair invoice for your car, one day before the crash," she said. "It states that the brakes were inspected under a special request. No trace left. Marcus paid for it. And this is a note from Daniel saying the job was done. Lucas, I don't want to believe Marcus did this, but I can't ignore what I found. Lucas stared at the documents, and for the first time, Emma saw him tremble. His hands clenched the edge of the table, knuckles turning white. His eyes locked on the words M. Harrington in Daniel's scribbled message, then slowly shifted to Emma, as if searching her face for any sign of deceit. Marcus was the only one there for me, he said, his voice hoarse. After the accident, he worked with the police, handled everything. They ruled it was brake failure, no signs of tampering. And now you want me to believe he betrayed me? Emma knelt to meet him at eye level, her gaze gentle but unwavering. I know you trust Marcus, she said softly, and I don't want to hurt you. But I asked everyone in the house about the accident, and they all avoided it. Then I found these. Lucas, even if there's just a chance the crash wasn't an accident, you deserve to know. Let me look further. I don't need you to believe me yet, but please give the truth a chance. Lucas looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. He remembered the hospital days Marcus at his side, promising to take care of everything, but he also remembered how Marcus had quickly taken control of the narrative, convinced him it was fate. These documents, though not definitive proof, planted a seed of doubt. He was a CEO, trained to weigh possibilities, and now he couldn't ignore what Emma had brought him. At last he nodded slowly, his voice rough and low. I'll have it investigated. Ethan, an old friend of mine, he'll handle it. You can keep looking too, but be careful. If you're right, I need to know. He paused, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer. But if you're wrong, Emma, I won't forgive you. Emma smiled, though her chest felt heavy. I hope I'm wrong, she said, her voice glowing with conviction. As she stood, his hand brushed lightly against hers, a gentle, almost unconscious gesture, but one that told her something had shifted. It wasn't full trust yet, but it was another crack in the glass wall between them. That night, Lucas sat alone, the documents still spread across the table. He picked up his phone and dialed. Ethan, he said, his voice quiet but firm, I need you to investigate the accident from 2 years ago. Find Daniel, the mechanic. Look into Marcus's involvement. Don't tell anyone, not even Emma. He didn't want her pulled deeper into danger, not when he still didn't know what was true. In his mind, the crash came back in flashes, the sound of metal, James's scream, the darkness swallowing everything. For 2 years, he had believed it was fate, that he was being punished for surviving. But now Emma's words in the documents forced him to face a terrifying possibility, that the man he called family might have betrayed him. The next morning, when Emma brought breakfast into his room, Lucas looked at her, his eyes no longer cold. You've stirred something I can't stop now, he said, his voice low. Be careful, Emma. If you're right, there are people who won't want you to keep digging. Emma smiled, her eyes glowing with quiet determination. I know, she said, but I won't stop. Not for me, for you. As she walked away, she didn't see the way Lucas watched her go, his eyes filled with something new. Respect, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope he thought he had lost long ago. Is this conversation helpful so far? Dawn slowly melted through a thin veil of mist, casting a gentle golden glow over the oak-covered hill. In the small training room tucked behind the mansion, the chirping of sparrows outside the window blended with Lucas's labored breathing. He sat on a therapy bench, hands gripping the parallel bars, his legs long dormant, now trembling as they struggled to bear weight. Across from him stood Emma, quiet but steady, her eyes glowing with belief, her arms ready to catch him if he fell. This was their 3rd day of secret physical therapy sessions, a decision Lucas had made after suspicions surrounding the accident surfaced and after witnessing Emma's relentless patience. He didn't want anyone to know, no servants, no doctors, just him and Emma, in this small space where he could confront himself without judgment. The choice to start therapy hadn't come easily. After allowing Emma to continue her investigation and reaching out to Ethan to look into Marcus, Lucas felt something within him stirring. He had lived in darkness for 2 years, convinced that both his body and soul had been destroyed in the crash. But Emma, her unwavering gaze, her care that persisted despite his coldness, made him wonder, could he reclaim a part of himself? Not the man who once ran a corporation, but someone no longer imprisoned by pain and guilt. You can do this, Emma said softly but firmly as Lucas tried to lift his left foot forward. She knelt beside him, gently correcting his posture, her hands light yet steady. Just take it slow, Lucas. Even a small step is a victory. Lucas didn't respond, but his eyes met hers, no longer sharp or guarded. He focused, sweat sliding down his brow, each movement a battle between body and will. When his foot touched the floor, even for a brief moment, Emma's face lit up in a radiant smile, as if watching a child take their first steps. "See?" she said, her eyes shining. "You did it." Lucas exhaled, still gripping the bars tightly, but a faint curve appeared at the corner of his lips, a small, unconscious smile. It was the first time Emma had seen him smile since the wedding. Fragile as it was, it made her heart thump. She said nothing, just quietly helped him back into the chair and dabbed his forehead with a small towel. In that moment, the space between them seemed to close, leaving only silent understanding and a glimmer of growing hope. Every morning they returned to the training room, just the two of them. Emma became Lucas's hands, his eyes, his unwavering support. She learned to read his smallest movements, when he needed a break, when he wanted to push one more step, when he was fighting himself. She never forced him, but she never left his side. Always patient, always gentle. Lucas began to change. His glances lingered longer, no longer filled with suspicion, but with curiosity, as if trying to understand why she stayed, why she believed in him when he had stopped believing in himself. One morning when Lucas nearly fell, Emma quickly caught him, her arms wrapping tightly around his waist to hold him steady. They stood close, breaths mingling, and for the first time, Lucas didn't pull away. He looked at her, his eyes deep and searching, then gently squeezed her hand, a small gesture, but one Emma felt deeply. "Thank you," he murmured, voice hoarse, as though the words had to push through walls just to be spoken. Emma smiled, her heart glowing. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "I'm here because I want to be." She didn't say out loud what was in her heart, but her eyes, warm, radiant, and tender, spoke for her. One day while cleaning out one of Lucas's old rooms, Emma came across an old leather-bound journal tucked behind a bookshelf. The name James was written on the cover, Lucas's older brother, the one who had died in the accident. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The handwriting was strong, yet filled with feeling. She skimmed the pages, and the final entries left her stunned. Lucas never wanted to be CEO. He just wanted freedom, to live simply and help others. But Father and I pushed him. I was wrong to force him into that chair. Emma clutched the journal, tears falling silently. She imagined James, whom Lucas had always spoken of with sorrow, carrying this guilt until his last day. She knew Lucas needed to read these words not just to understand James, but to forgive himself. And yet she hesitated, afraid that this truth might reopen wounds too deep. That evening, after training, she brought the journal to Lucas's room. He sat by the window, moonlight casting a pale glow across his face, highlighting weariness and something else, a quiet flicker of light. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling, "I found this." It belonged to James. Lucas's hand trembled as he touched the leather cover. He opened it and began reading. When he reached the last page, his eyes turned red. Tears slid down his cheeks for the first time, not in sleep, but fully awake, fully feeling. "James died because of me," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't want to be CEO, but he and Father pushed me. If I hadn't gotten in that car, he'd still be alive." Emma sat beside him, took his hand, and held it tight. "Lucas, you're not broken," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "James didn't want you to live in guilt. He wanted you to be free, to be happy. And I'm here because I believe in you, not just that you can walk again, but that you can rise again with your heart." Lucas looked at her for a long time. You're not like anyone else, Emma," he whispered. She smiled, her heart pounding, and in his eyes she saw another fracture wider, deeper in the glass wall between them. Lucas held her gaze, his eyes filled with pain, but also with a new light, one of understanding. He didn't speak, but his hand squeezed hers tightly, as though holding on to her, was the only way not to slip back into the darkness. In that moment, Emma felt a connection that went beyond trust, something invisible yet strong, quietly drawing them closer. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The dim light of the mansion's study cast a dull glow across Marcus's face, highlighting his fake smile and eyes as cold and sharp as a serpent's. Emma stood before him, her hands clenched tightly, heart pounding, but her gaze steady and unwavering. She had been summoned there late at night after a staff member accidentally let slip that Marcus knew she was investigating Lucas's accident. His secretive glances, the whispered phone calls she overheard, and the tension in his voice whenever she mentioned Daniel, the mechanic, had all confirmed what she feared most. Marcus was hiding something, and he would do whatever it took to keep it buried. "Emma," Marcus began, his voice low but laced with menace, "who do you think you are? Some amateur detective? A hero?" He leaned forward slightly. "You're poking into things that don't concern you. Take my advice, stop now. If you play smart, things don't have to get unpleasant." A chill ran down Emma's spine, but she didn't let the fear show. She had already sent the repair receipt and Daniel's note to Mr. Henry, the independent lawyer she trusted, and she knew she was closing in on the truth. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus," she said, calm but resolute. "Lucas deserves to know the truth, and I won't stop no matter what you do." Marcus stepped closer, his smile twisting into something more dangerous. "You're more stubborn than I thought," he whispered. "But remember this, Emma, accidents can happen. You'd better think carefully for your own sake, and for Lucas's." He held her in a final piercing stare, a silent threat heavy in the air. Emma turned and left the study with shaking hands, but her head held high. His warning had been a knife to the throat, but she wouldn't stop. Not for pride, but for Lucas, the man she had quietly loved for so long, who was learning to rise again from the wreckage and who, she was now certain, was surrounded by betrayal. Meanwhile, Lucas was not sitting idly by. After entrusting the investigation to Ethan, a former security officer and trusted friend, he received a preliminary report on a cold morning. The email was brief, but it made his heart race. Suspicious financial transfers traced from Marcus's account to a shell company just before the accident. Daniel, the mechanic, confirmed to have received payment from that company before disappearing. Further verification needed, but Marcus may be involved. Lucas read the message over and over again, each word driving a knife into the trust he had once placed in his cousin. Marcus, the man who had stayed by his side through the darkest days, who had handled the police, comforted him after James's death. Could he be the one behind it all? His hands tightened into fists, suppressing the fury and grief boiling within him. The seed of doubt had taken root. He didn't tell Emma, not yet. He didn't want her pulled further into danger without solid proof. But each time he looked at her, those bright, believing eyes, that soft smile as she supported him during therapy, he felt an overwhelming urge to protect her. Not just because she was helping him, but because of something deeper he still didn't dare to name. Emma continued her investigation, more cautious than ever. Mr. Henry had located a potential lead. Daniel might be living under a new name in a small town several hundred miles away. Emma avoided direct confrontation with Marcus, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Every creaking floorboard, every sidelong glance from a staff member put her on edge. Still, she pressed on. She knew the truth about the crash was the key to giving Lucas justice, and she refused to give up. One afternoon, Emma drove the old mansion car to the town where Henry's contact awaited with more information about Daniel. The mountain roads were winding, flanked by dense oak forests, and the cold air seeped through the car's thin windows. Focused on the drive, she glanced at the rearview mirror and her stomach dropped. A black car had appeared behind her, keeping distance but never overtaking, even when she slowed down. Her heart pounded. She pressed the gas, trying to pull ahead. But as she rounded a sharp curve, the tires suddenly lost grip. Metal shrieked. The car veered off the road and slammed into a massive oak tree. Her head hit the steering wheel. Blood trickled from her forehead, and the darkness swallowed her whole. Lucas was in the training room, struggling to take one more step between the parallel bars when the butler burst in, panic-stricken. "Mr. Lucas, Miss Emma, she's been in an accident." The words hit him like a dagger to the heart. He nearly fell from his wheelchair, fists gripping the arms, breath short and ragged. "Where is she?" he shouted, voice breaking. "Tell me where." When they brought him to the crash site, Lucas saw the crumpled car against the tree and Emma lying motionless on a stretcher, blood trailing down her forehead. His heart felt like it stopped. The past came rushing back, the screeching metal, James's scream, the blackness swallowing everything. He had relived it 1,000 times since. If I hadn't let James drive that day, if I'd been behind the wheel, he had blamed himself endlessly. Now staring at Emma unconscious, a new horrific fear gripped him. Fate was repeating itself. The people he loved, James, now Emma, were being taken from him, one by one, as if by some cruel curse he couldn't escape. "Emma!" he cried out, slamming his fists against the armrests of his chair, tears and sweat mixing on his face. "She can't die. Do you hear me? She can't." His voice cracked, no longer cold, no longer restrained. Panic overwhelmed him, and through it all, one question haunted him. Was Marcus behind this too? Ethan's report, the suspicious money, the role Marcus played in the last accident? If Marcus had harmed Lucas before, was it possible he'd now tried to silence Emma? The thought made Lucas tremble with fury and with fear. The dim hospital lights cast a pale glow across Emma's face, highlighting the bruises and the bandage on her forehead. She lay on the bed, her breathing shallow but steady, eyes half closed as if floating in a fragile dream. Beside her, Lucas sat motionless, his hand gripping hers so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His eyes were bloodshot, veins visible from strain. He hadn't slept since the moment she was rushed in after the horrific accident. The room was silent, save for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. But inside Lucas, a storm of emotion was roaring. He couldn't erase the image of the crumpled car at the base of the tree, the blood on Emma's forehead, the moment he thought he'd lost her, just like James. As if fate was determined to take away everyone he dared to love. That fear, tangled with guilt and new evidence from Ethan about Marcus's involvement in the crash 2 years ago, stripped away the last of his cold, detached facade. Emma had changed him, little by little, with her patience, her courage, and a light he still couldn't name. And now, with her lying there alive, but fragile, he realized a painful truth. He didn't just need her, he was learning to love her. Emma stirred slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking at the soft light above her. Her body ached all over, but the first thing she saw was Lucas, his hollow face, his red-rimmed eyes, and the way he held her hand, like he was terrified she might vanish. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice weak but warm. He leaned closer, as if he had to see her awake to truly believe it. "Emma," he said, his voice rough and trembling, "don't ever scare me like that again. You can't let something like this happen. Do you understand?" Tears rolled down his cheeks, and for the first time, Emma saw him vulnerable, not physically, but emotionally exposed, a heart no longer guarded. She gave a faint smile, despite the pain. "I promise," she said, her eyes filled with quiet strength. She tried to sit up, wincing at each movement. Lucas quickly helped her, his hands careful, steady, like she was the most precious thing in the world. Even once she sat upright, he didn't let go. His gaze was locked on her, filled with pain, and something even deeper, something he had never shown her before. "Emma," he began, voice low and trembling, as though each word had to break through a wall inside him. "I married you for the inheritance, for the CEO position. It was all a plan, cold, calculated, without emotion. I thought you were the same, here for the money, for the contract. But now, I'm terrified of losing you." He paused, drawing in a shaky breath, his eyes searching hers as if trying to reach her soul. "When I saw you lying there, unconscious, I thought I couldn't survive losing you. Not like I lost James. I don't want to live in a world where you're not in it." His confession washed over Emma like warmth through ice, soothing wounds she'd hidden for so long. She looked at him, her eyes soft but fierce. Lucas, she said, her voice gentle but sure, I didn't marry you just because of the contract. I've loved you for a long time, long before you even knew me. I saw you, the man who built homes for orphans, who rejected the spotlight to do meaningful, quiet things. I watched you share meals with those children, carry them in your arms. I admired you, and when I heard about the accident, I cried alone. Not because I pitied you, but because I mourned for a brilliant soul swallowed by darkness. She paused, tears slipping down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. I'm here because I want to be here with you. Whether you're a billionaire, in a wheelchair, or just Lucas, the man learning how to rise again. Lucas looked at her, as if drawn in by every word, by a sincerity he had never dared to believe in. He had built a glass wall around his heart, but now it was cracking under her light. You love me? He whispered, his voice unsteady. Why? I'm not that man anymore. I'm just a cripple, someone who lives with guilt and shadows. Emma shook her head, and though her hands trembled, she wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into her embrace. You're not crippled, Lucas, she said, voice shaking with emotion but unwavering. Your heart is still here, and it's stronger than you know. I love you not for who you were, but for who you are right now. The man who's trying, fighting, standing again. I'm here because I believe in you, and I'm not leaving. Lucas let her hold him, his arms slowly encircling her, holding tight as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the world. He breathed in her warmth, the soft scent of her hair, and for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to feel something more than pain. He leaned down, his lips found hers, and they kissed. The kiss was gentle but full of fire, like a promise, like a river washing away years of pain, doubt, and distance. It wasn't just love, it was healing. It was light slipping through the fractures of two hearts that had been broken too long. When they pulled apart, breath mingling, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, tears falling silently. I don't know if I deserve you, he whispered, voice shaking, but I want to try to become the man you believe in. Emma smiled, her hand gently brushing his cheek, wiping away his tears. You don't have to deserve me, she said softly. You just have to be here with me. That's enough. In the days that followed, Emma slowly recovered, but Lucas never left her side. He sat by her bed telling her stories about growing up with James, the dreams he once had before being forced into the CEO chair. For the first time, he shared Ethan's report, the suspicious transactions tied to Marcus, the signs that Marcus might be behind not only his accident, but Emma's too. I don't want to believe Marcus did it, he said quietly, but I will find the truth, and if he laid a hand on you, he'll pay. Emma took his hand, her gaze steady. We'll find the truth, Lucas, she said, together. She didn't say it aloud, but in her heart she knew. Their love, still new but powerful, would be the strength that carried them through whatever came next. The early sunlight filtered through the ancient oak trees, casting golden rays on the headquarters of the Harrington Corporation, where decisions that shaped an empire were made. Lucas stood before the mirror in his bedroom, hands slightly trembling as he adjusted his tie. The black suit hugged his frame, concealing months of pain and the scars that ran deeper than skin. He now only needed a light cane for support, a testament to a grueling recovery, with Emma as the light that had guided him through. Today, he would walk into the boardroom not as the ghost of a fallen CEO, but as a man who had reclaimed himself, ready to face the one who betrayed him and took from him the person he loved most. Emma stood behind him, eyes bright with faith but shadowed by worry. You okay, Lucas? She asked gently. Marcus won't make this easy. Lucas turned to her, his gaze soft but resolute. I'm ready, he said quietly. For you, for James, for the truth. Today it ends. He reached out and brushed her cheek, a small, intimate gesture that made Emma's heart skip. She took his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze, grounding him before the storm. The boardroom felt suffocating despite its luxurious design. The board members sat around the long table, their eyes flicking between tension and curiosity. At the head stood Marcus, clad in a sleek gray suit, the smugness on his face thinly veiled by professionalism. He was in the middle of presenting his plan to assume the CEO role, his voice smooth but laced with ambition. Lucas is no longer fit to lead, Marcus said, his gaze sweeping the room like a predator. I propose we transfer executive power today for the good of the company. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room, but before he could continue, the doors burst open. Lucas stepped inside. Each step was slow but deliberate, his cane tapping lightly against the marble floor. The room fell silent. All eyes locked on him, the man they never expected to see, standing again, now upright, sharp-eyed, and unwavering. Emma followed behind, calm but fierce, a silent warrior at his side. Marcus froze. The smug smile faltered. Lucas didn't speak right away. He stopped at the center of the room, eyes fixed on Marcus, voice steady when it finally broke the silence. I'm not here to negotiate, Marcus, he said. I'm here to finish what you started 2 years ago. He nodded to Emma, who stepped forward and inserted a USB into the projector. The screen lit up. First security footage Ethan had recovered Marcus speaking to Daniel beside Lucas's car just before the accident. Then came the damning documents, a signed repair receipt with Marcus's name, Daniel's notes detailing special requests to the brakes, financial transfers from Marcus's account to a shell company that paid Daniel, and finally an audio recording Daniel's confession that Marcus hired him to sabotage the brakes. The room held its breath. Marcus shot to his feet, panic breaking across his face. This is fake, he yelled, pointing at Lucas. You staged all this to ruin me. You always had everything. Lucas, your career, your father, James. I didn't mean to hurt James. I was targeting you. James. He took the wheel himself. It wasn't my fault. Lucas stood still, pain flashing in his eyes at the mention of James. He stepped closer, voice low but cutting. Tell me why, Marcus, he said. Tell me why you betrayed me. Why you betrayed him. Marcus let out a dry, bitter laugh, his facade cracking. You don't get it, Lucas, he snapped, voice shaking with hatred. I was always your shadow. Your father raised me, but he only ever saw you. James loved me, but he always chose you. I smiled. I played nice, but inside I was screaming. Why did you get everything? The career, the love, the family, and I got nothing. He paused, eyes now wet. All I ever wanted was the CEO position, just once to stand above you. I paid Daniel to sabotage the car so you wouldn't take over the company. But James, he wasn't supposed to die. He got in the car, not you. I never meant for that to happen. Lucas's grip tightened around his cane. Tears welled in his eyes, but his voice remained firm. My father loved you like a son. James protected you. He always said we were brothers, the three of us. And I saw you as my brother too. But you chose betrayal. You didn't just hurt me, Marcus. You killed James, and you nearly took Emma from me. Marcus backed away, panic now overtaking him. You don't understand, he shouted. I had no choice. I did what I had to. His words were cut off as the doors opened again. 2 security officers entered, followed by a police detective. Ethan had handed over the evidence. Marcus was out of options. As the officers moved to arrest him, Marcus snarled at Lucas one last time. You'll never win, Lucas, he hissed. But Lucas didn't flinch. He simply watched, calm and resolute as a man who had walked through darkness and finally stood in the light. When the room was empty, only Lucas and Emma remained. He turned to her, eyes full of emotion. Emma, he said softly, you saved me. In a way no doctor, no amount of time ever could. You, your heart, your belief in me. Emma smiled through her tears and stepped forward, resting her hand on his chest, feeling the strength of his heartbeat beneath. You saved yourself, Lucas, she whispered. I just reminded you that you could. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, his hand lifting to her chin. I won't promise you the world, he murmured, but I will spend my world loving you, protecting you, always. A year had passed. Soft spring sunlight draped itself over the oak fields, the same ones that once bore witness to Lucas and Emma's darkest days. The villa atop the hill no longer felt like a tomb. The rose bushes Emma had planted were in full bloom, and the laughter of children from the nearby rehabilitation center carried on the wind, bringing with it life and hope. Lucas stood in the center's courtyard, no longer needing a cane, no longer bound to a wheelchair. His steps were strong and steady, pressing into the soft grass beneath his feet. He had fully recovered not just in body, but in spirit, and it was all because of Emma, the woman who had pulled him out of the shadows. He had returned as CEO of the Harrington Corporation, but he was no longer the man who once sat in that chair out of duty or inheritance. He led now with a renewed vision, driving the company to unprecedented heights, yet always putting people above profit. He had expanded charitable programs, built housing for orphans, funded scholarships for underprivileged youth, and most importantly, with Emma by his side, he founded the Light Center, a haven for the disabled and homeless, a place where people could rediscover their worth and their will to rise again, just as he had. Emma was the heart of the center. She ran it with tireless dedication, organizing therapy sessions, offering emotional support to those fighting their own demons. She never sought the spotlight, but every smile she brought to someone's face was reward enough. Lucas often watched her from afar, a quiet awe in his chest. She wasn't just his wife. She was his guiding light, the reason he stood where he was now. One early morning, the center buzzed with laughter during a special walking class for children with disabilities. Lucas knelt beside a small boy, just 8 years old, helping him with his first steps using tiny crutches. "You can do it," Lucas said warmly, his voice a steady calm. "One step at a time." The boy beamed up at him, and when his foot touched the ground and held, a cheer rose from the people around them. From beneath the sprawling oak nearby, Emma watched. Dressed simply in a white blouse, her brown hair tied high, she saw Lucas, her Lucas, not as the CEO, not as the man who had healed, but as someone who was now giving back the very hope he had once struggled to find. Tears ran quietly down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from pure, full-hearted joy. They had risen from ruin together, from the mocking whispers at their wedding, from the storm of doubt and grief, from Marcus's betrayal and that terrible crash. Now they weren't just husband and wife, they were two souls who had healed one another. Lucas looked up and found her gaze. He smiled a gentle, familiar smile that she'd come to love more than anything. He gave a small nod to a nearby staff member and began walking toward her, every step steady, every motion a silent declaration of everything he had overcome. When he reached her, he took her hand and led her under the oak's canopy, where golden light filtered through the leaves in soft, flickering patches. "Emma," he said, his voice low, trembling with emotion. "A year ago, I didn't think I'd ever stand again. I didn't think I'd ever find myself again. But you changed everything. You didn't just help me walk. You taught me how to live, how to love, how to believe in good things again." He paused, drawing in a deep breath, his eyes locked on hers. "I used to think I didn't deserve you, but now I know I want to spend the rest of my life proving that maybe, just maybe, I can." Emma felt her heart pound as Lucas knelt before her, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, its surface gleaming in the sunlight. "Emma," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "you married me once for a contract, for faith. Now I'm asking you to marry me again for love, for our future. Will you be my wife again?" Tears spilled freely down Emma's cheeks, but her smile outshone them all. She knelt down with him, arms circling his shoulders, head resting against his. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy, "I married you because I loved you, and I would marry you 1,000 times more because you are my whole world." They embraced beneath the oak tree as cheers and applause rose from the center behind them. Lucas gently slid the ring onto her finger, his hands slightly shaking but sure. He leaned in and kissed her a kiss soft yet fierce, a promise that whatever storms life might bring, they would always have each other. That night, Lucas and Emma sat together on a wooden bench outside the center. Moonlight brushed their faces in silver, and the ring on her finger sparkled like a quiet vow. "I can't promise life will always be easy," he said gently, voice warm, "but I promise I'll always be here with you, the way you were always there for me." Emma rested her head on his shoulder, smiling peacefully. "That's all I've ever needed," she whispered. And they sat together in the quiet of the night, knowing that no matter how painful the past had been, they had found each other. And together they had stood up from the ashes to build a future full of light.